Well, boys and girls, we're almost there. Almost at the era that I hate the most. But not quite. This is Video Game Growing Pains, and we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XII today. Final Fantasy XII is, again, an incredibly divisive game. But unlike for 11, I think it's for far less petty reasons and far more valid ones. Let me give you a little bit of background. You see, Final Fantasy X in its earliest stages of development was planned for consoles, while everything Final Fantasy XI onwards was going to be online. This idea was rapidly scrapped, however, a lot of those sensibilities from Final Fantasy XI came back with Final Fantasy XII to consoles. And my word, there has never been a game that's been quite so good, but also quite so bad in the Final Fantasy series. Even 2 and 3, for all their faults, are so much better than 12, and so much more beloved, even if they're forgotten. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, alright? Let me talk a little bit about Final Fantasy XII. You are in the world of Ivalice. Yes, really. You remember that world from Final Fantasy Tactics, which was a totally separate thing from all the other worlds? Yeah, it came back as part of the main series. Uh, if Square had just kept it as its own thing, that would have been fine. But anyway, pettiness aside, Ivalice is at war. You've got an empire to the north, you've got a small kingdom, Dalmasca, that's being assaulted, and you've got several different groups vying for a hidden power. Basically, the kingdom of Damascus is destroyed, and its princess Ashe is on a quest for revenge. Along the way, the pirate Balthier, the sky pirate, and his assistant Fran get involved with her alongside two street urchins, Vaughn and Penello, and a disgraced general, Bosch. All of them end up working together and sort of get embroiled in a plot by both the Empire, which has a lot of corruption and manipulation into it, and by several godlike entities which are manipulating the world as a whole. The story is actually really, really good. Bear in mind, I hate Final Fantasy XII. I hate it a lot. But the game is really clever with its storytelling. The script, not always. We have a few stupid moments, like one of the characters, Vaughn. He learns that Fran's race, Balthier's assistant, who happens to be kind of a giant bunny lady. Anyway, he learns that they don't age like us, so he decides, "Hey, how old are you?" And everybody is sort of like, "Oh, how rude! You're an idiot." Ah, it's funny. It's like, no, bad script. Or Vaughn running around screaming, "I'm a general! I'm a general!" Yeah, no. Stupid script moments aside, the overall story is really interesting. We start out with a basic quest for vengeance, where people are trying to find hidden artifacts. Princess Ashe and everyone else are looking for a powerful reagent called nethicite, which can be used to cause great devastation. The Empire is looking for it for the same reason, but they want it to tip their scale in the war. However, Ashe starts seeing hallucinations of her dead fiance, while Vaughn starts seeing hallucinations of his dead brother, and the others start getting affected by this in strange ways too. Nethicite is not as it seems, apparently. And this is where things get good. You see, it turns out that a race of godlike beings called the Okuria have actually been manipulating the world from time to time using Nethicite. They give Nethicite to those that they predetermine are meant to be the rulers who will basically bow to their whims, treat them with respect, etc., and let them control things. And it turns out that the Empire, our main baddie, whose name is Vayne, and who's assisted by Sidolphus and a rogue Okuria called Vana, they're actually not the bad guys. Yeah, they do terrible things, but they are honestly more heroes than Vaughn and the others, which is kind of ironic. The story makes you believe at some point that it's going to be romance because we keep getting hints that maybe Ash's fiance will be brought back to life, or it will turn into Vaughn and Penello, making out. But it never goes that way. It stays a quest. It starts out as a quest for vengeance, and then it sort of goes into philosophy, the idea of cutting the strings that tie the puppets of this world together. And that's really kind of interesting. You see, the Okuria can give Nethicite with a special sword. You cut it from the Nethicite that they've given into the world, and you are able to use that to lay waste to nations. And the goal suddenly stops becoming taking back our kingdom, and suddenly starts becoming, we must not let this power be misused, and we must not bow to these godlike entities. It's very subtle, and there's a lot of very potent themes about familial loss, manipulation, and the true idea of what's really important, life and death, of madness and sanity, family and trust, betrayal. It's all in there, and it's really good. Like I said, the script is terrible, but the story is excellent. I must say, that's probably the best reason to play the game is the story. Now, like I said before, you have several different races, Fran being a bunny lady, we have the Evilesians, we have Moogles, and for the most part, it's pretty cool. We even get some new races like the Lizard Men who are trying to, hunt Balthier because they're bounty hunters. Overall, it adds to a lot of world building, but it's a carryover from Final Fantasy XI that I didn't care for. Alongside that, the characters themselves, a few of them are very enjoyable to get along with. Balthier's suaveness is pretty cool. Fran's ice cold but still caring demeanor. Even Vaughn and Penelo's goofiness grow on you, and Ash's seriousness. They are a little obnoxious at times. I'm General Bosch von Ronsenberg. Oh God, why Square? But generally, on the whole, they're not bad characters. However, this is where a lot of my praises have to stop. Graphically, the game is pretty good. The cutscenes are gorgeous, and for monster designs and summoned beasts, they're exquisite. You have an incredible amount of variety in designs. For the characters and their facial animations, though, I have to say I find them very ugly. They are very dark skinned and very creepy looking. I don't mean dark skinned like they were meant to look that way, it just looks like the shading and shadows of faces is wrong. It's really weird. The voice acting is okay, sometimes, but the overall look of humans is so bizarre. Everything else is pretty good, but humans just look weird in this if they're not decked out in armor. Musically, the game is a mixed bag, if I'm being honest. Mr. Uematsu was getting ready to move to his new studio, so he only did one composition for it, and you can tell which one it is. It's the one that makes you feel something. Hitoshi Sakamoto of Final Fantasy Tactics fame did the soundtrack for this one, and while not great, it's okay. It has a few good moments. Really, the biggest problem with this game is a lot of the Final Fantasy thematic connections in the gameplay. Thematically, it bears very little resemblance to the standard Final Fantasies and a lot more resemblance to Final Fantasy Tactics. All of your summoned beasts are based off of the monsters that you fought in Final Fantasy Tactics. This doesn't have to be bad. This gives us a lot of variety and a very rich new mythos to indulge in. However, it also feels very disjointed and separate from the main entries into the series and will likely make longtime fans not want to play it. But that aside, I think that the game does a good enough job on its own. Where I really must complain is the combat. You see, the gameplay, while claiming to have party-based systems, really doesn't. It plays a lot like an MMORPG, except you're not online. You go into an open world, you click on the enemy you want to fight, and then you auto-battle, or, select skills, until you win. The problem with this is that you are not only controlling one guy. There are 4 party members. Either the computer will control them, or you can switch into them, but that's tiresome and cumbersome and frustrating. And sometimes you'll have guest characters, but you can't really control them at all. I found combat to be remarkably tedious because you would just go to battle and just put your controller down. Unless, of course, you had to heal, in which case you were fumbling like crazy. The gameplay was trying to be very automated, like a football draft almost, because what they had was called a license board, where you could buy licenses to use different kinds of weapons and armor to give your characters more specialization, which was an interesting idea, I admit. Though stupid in practice, who needs a license to understand how to use a hat? But it was also used for the idea of comboing things. The idea being, for example, that when your hit points go below 50, you will use a potion. When your enemy's health is above 75%, you'll use magic. This was pretty clever, but it was clever for the wrong reasons. It was clever in that it was trying to automate the game. You didn't need to actually play the game. And while some people enjoyed being able to set this up so that they could basically let the game play itself, I found it to be personally very frustrating. I felt very detached from the characters and the story, and it was pretty much the precursor to Final Fantasy XIII's The Game That Plays Itself. We'll get there. Oh God, will we? On the whole, trying to control it manually is incredibly frustrating because of how fast the battles move, and it's impossible to switch through all the characters to get everyone doing what you want them to do manually. So you have to use the license and gambits. Otherwise, you're in trouble. There are some good parts about this. For example, the summons are, as I said, excellent. And the limit breaks, which they call, I believe, missed climaxes, are jaw-droppingly amazing to watch. They don't really seem to match because why are you throwing around fireballs when most of the time you're using a sword? But, they're very cool. Now, there are a few other big problems. Like I said, you have your standard characters who you're not allowed to really control. You control one person and the others play as if it's an MMO with the computer controlling them. But there's a lot of cryptic idiocy in the game. Let me give you a perfect example. When I bought the strategy guide for it, the first thing it said to me was, there is this one chest that looks exactly like every chest in the entire game in the starting city. Do not open it! If you do, the most powerful weapon in the game will vanish! I was like, wait, what? Really? I said, yes, there are 4 chests in the world that look the same as every other chest, and if you open them before you get the weapon, it will vanish and you will never find it. I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Who is going to know that without an RPG? I mean, an RPG, walkthrough. I talk to almost every character in this game, and no one mentions it. And then there's the summons. Like I said, the designs are really good. In battle, they look pretty, but they're like your party members. You cannot control them. You have one party member who you control, and then the summon. And the summons, doing their mega attacks, their limit breaks, all of them have different conditions you have to do. One of them, the only time it will do it is if its HP is below 10%. Another one, it will only do it if it dies while it has re-raise on it. It's really freaking tedious and complicated and stupid to try and figure out. There's a lot of crypticness in the game that is just pointless. And alongside that, there is the lack of control. Feeling like you don't have control of your party, feeling like you don't have control of your summons is incredibly frustrating, especially after the sublime control scheme from Final Fantasy X and X-2. Now, all that said, is the game bad? God, I wish I could say yes. But it's not, honestly. The story is excellent, as I've said before. The music is passable, and while I think the human models look quite janky at times, overall, it's a very aesthetically pleasing game. I don't like the combat one bit, but if you can get over the combat, and I did manage to force myself through 60 hours of the game, so I managed to get over it, then the game has some redeeming values. For the longest time, I thought 12 would be the worst that we would get with Final Fantasy, and everything after it would be judged based on how bad it was. But that was very petty of me. Looking back, I see that it did have its merits, even though I didn't like them. For one thing, there is a huge amount of things that you can actually do in the game. You can hunt monsters as a bounty hunter, you can go on different side quests and different hidden things. The most interesting part of the game is trying to find the different summons, because every character can have 3, so that gives you a grand total of about 18 summons. Oh yeah, summons are locked to characters. Woo. Either way, there were some very interesting summons hidden around, and the quests that you had to go on them were quite interesting. You even get a visit from our pal Gilgamesh in the bounty hunting ring, where you can go and fight him. And he's pretty fun to deal with, too. Overall, Final Fantasy XII is not bad, but it's a colossal step down. It's a good game that was trying, I think, too hard to be something it wasn't. Final Fantasy XII was trying to be an MMORPG when, honestly, it was just a regular RPG. The sad thing is, the character development, when they're not being stupid with the script, is really good. You get a lot of connections to previous Final Fantasy Tactics games because you get to see the world of Ivalice evolve. You get a real feeling for how the story is different and a lot of the thematic elements to it. The gameplay is frustrating as all crap, but the story, the music, the graphics, it makes it worthwhile. And I want to hate the game, but I can't. I don't want to play it again. I've played almost every Final Fantasy at least twice, but not 12. But, I can understand that. Ironically, a lot of people felt the same way, not just in the States, but in Japan. They released another edition of this called the International Zodiac Job System, which actually changed up the license grid to make it more job-centric, where they still had the same idea and the same MMO concept, but instead of being just a blanket system where everyone has to learn to use a specific hat, you have a more job-based system where you will learn to use weapons and items based on your job, which I honestly think makes a lot more sense. Overall, this new version was only released in Japan, and it was a great improvement. A lot more control was added to the characters, a lot more stuff. There was New Game Plus, there was better music, more quests. It was better, but we didn't get to hear in the States. However, I will say that Final Fantasy XII, while I don't like it, is still a decent enough game. If you like MMOs, it's a game I think you'll quite enjoy. If you like traditional Final Fantasy, give it a pass. You're not missing too much. The story is really good, I will say that, but Wikipedia it. Look it up on YouTube. You don't need to invest 60 hours of your life into this. Uh, Now, you'd think we'd be done with this era, right? Oh, no! We have a lot more to talk about before we move on to Final Fantasy XIII and the era of downfall. However, we still have a little bit more to talk about with 12, too. Final Fantasy XII got a sequel, and I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about that next time. Then, we're going to move into the sidequels, the spin-offs, and some more Final Fantasy Tactics games before we talk about Final Fantasy XIII and why I've given up on the series. Well, sort of. We'll get there. Anyway, next time, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings. See you!